The dust hadn't even begun to settle around the creaking wagon wheels when Tobias Crow sensed something was terribly wrong. Standing on his porch, he watched the figure before him. Not the plain, humble mail-order bride he'd been exchanging letters with for 3 long months, but a woman who seemed to have stepped straight out of a saloon's midnight dream. She wore a scarlet dress that hugged every tempting curve, her painted lips curling into a knowing smile that hinted at secrets darker than the night itself. She carried herself with a confidence that could make a man forget his own name. And her raven black hair was piled high in a style far too elaborate for these frontier plains. When her piercing green eyes met his, Tobias felt a strange jolt in his chest, not disappointment, but a flicker of warning, like a shadow passing over the sun. The weathered driver, a man whose trembling hands betrayed his nervousness, hesitated as he stepped down from his battered wagon. His voice was low, almost reluctant, as he broke the silence. "Mr. Crow," he said, with a tone that warned of bad news, "I've got your package here." "A package?" Tobias's brow furrowed, as if the very words tasted strange on his tongue. He looked at the woman, then back at the driver, trying to grasp what he was seeing. The letters had described a widow named Sarah Beth Collins from Missouri, a practical, modest woman seeking a peaceful life, eager to settle down and do honest work. But this woman in front of him, dressed in crimson, with a gaze that seemed to see right through him, looked like she'd never known a day's honest labor, and stability might as well be a myth in her world. "There's been some kind of mistake," Tobias rasped, voice rougher than he'd intended, as he stepped down from the porch, each boot striking the wooden boards with a heavy echo. His eyes flicked over her, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the quiet, steady bride he'd been promised. He gestured helplessly at her, the fiery figure who now stood beside his fence post, her presence more commanding than any man's authority. "I ordered a wife, not this," he said, voice trailing off as he struggled to find the right words. Violet McCall's laugh burst out, clear and sharp, a sound that seemed to dance like a fiddle tune in a midnight saloon. Beautiful, yet deadly, all at once. "No mistake, darling," she drawled, her voice dripping with a southern lilt that made his name sound like honey on a biscuit. "I reckon the situation's a bit more complicated than you were told." She reached into a small beaded purse and pulled out a crumpled, yellowed letter. The paper had seen better days, but the words inside carried the weight of truth. Sarah Beth Collins had sent her in her place, claiming she'd found religion, couldn't bear to leave her missionary work behind. Violet's smile sharpened into something more dangerous. "She also told me to tell you, what you really need isn't a wife, but someone who understands the world for what it truly is." Tobias's hands trembled as he took the letter, his grip unsteady. A woman who could serve him better than any wife of the frontier, someone who had truly lived enough to understand what he was offering, was being written about as if she were a gift, not a scandal. But buried within that letter, there was something else, something that made Tobias's blood run cold. Sarah Beth spoke of men hunting for Violet, dangerous men who wouldn't rest until they found her, no matter the cost. She wrote about debts that money couldn't settle and mistakes that haunted a person across state lines, like shadows that refused to stay buried. "What kind of trouble are you running from?" Tobias asked, folding the crumpled paper in his hand, eyes fixed on her face. For a fleeting moment, the confident veneer slipped away, revealing something raw, something desperate lurking behind her eyes. The kind that could get a person killed, she whispered softly. But don't worry, cowboy. I don't plan on staying long enough for it to catch up with me. That was when he saw it. Her driver, already back on the wagon, reins in hand, ready to peel away without even unloading her trunk. In that instant, Tobias realized this wasn't a mistake at all. No, this was something far darker. Someone had sent Violet McCall straight to him, fully aware of her nature, fully aware of the storm that would follow. The wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving him alone with a woman who belonged in this world about as much as an orchid belonged in a cattle pen. Violet stood still, her gaze sharp and calculating, her emerald eyes waiting, measuring him, testing what kind of man he truly was. "You can't stay here," he said, though the words felt hollow as they left his mouth. The nearest town was 2 days away, and the sun was already sinking behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the ranch. "This is a respectable place. I've got a reputation to consider." Respectable? She tasted the word like bitter medicine. That's a luxury for those who've never had to choose between their reputation and survival. She moved toward him, each step deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey, measuring the distance between them with quiet intent. "But I understand your concern, Mr. Crow," she said softly. "A woman like me could ruin a man like you just by breathing the same air." Her voice, laced with quiet danger, made his chest tighten. He'd spent 3 years alone on this ranch. 3 years since his first wife's death in childbirth, along with their child. 3 years of talking only to horses and cattle, because human words had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Now, this dangerous beauty was looking at him as if she could see straight through to the loneliness and need he'd buried deep. "It's not just about reputation," he managed, trying to steady his voice. "You said yourself, there are men after you. Dangerous men. I won't have that kind of trouble coming to my land." Violet tilted her head, and for the first time since stepping off that wagon, genuine curiosity flickered in her eyes, like she was weighing him, gauging whether he was the man who could handle what was coming. "Are you scared of a little danger, cowboy? Or are you afraid of what I might do?" The words cut through the quiet like a gunshot, sharp and deliberate. Before he could muster a response, she was so close he could smell her perfume, something dark, exotic, and far too expensive for this dusty frontier. Her fingertips reached out, brushing lightly against the letter clenched in his hand, her touch lingering on his knuckles, as if she could read his secrets in the faint tremor of his grip. "Sarah Beth wrote more than what you read aloud," she murmured softly, her voice carrying a strange tenderness that seemed at odds with her hardened eyes. "She told me about your wife, about the baby, how each day in that hollow house is slowly killing you from the inside." Her words dripped with a quiet compassion that made him pause. Maybe she understood what it meant to carry loss like a second skin. The blow hit him harder than any bullet. Sarah Beth had never mentioned knowing about Martha and the child, not in her letters, not in her silence. How could she know what he kept buried? How could she speak of his wife, of his pain, with such certainty? His voice, barely more than a whisper, cracked as he asked, "How do you know all this?" Violet's smile faltered, her face softening into something almost tragic, as if she carried her own scars, hidden but etched deep. "Sarah Beth and I, we share a history darker than you might see on the surface," she said, voice low and deliberate. "We both learned the hard way what happens when trusting the wrong man leaves a mark you can't wash away. That was when he caught sight of the faint scar along her jawline, so subtle it could be missed unless you knew where to look. And then he saw the way she carried herself, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble or to draw steel if need be. It dawned on him then. Whatever shadow she was fleeing from had already left its mark on her, branded her in ways that no time could erase. Her voice grew softer, almost fragile, as she continued. The men after me, they're not just dangerous. They're connected to powers with long memories and even longer reach. People who don't forgive debts, who forget faces, or leave no trace behind. A shiver ran down his spine, colder than the evening air. What kind of monsters did she mean? Violet turned her gaze to the horizon, where the dying sun painted the sky blood red, as if warning of a coming storm. They own judges, sheriffs, people who make folks disappear like shadows into the night. She said quietly. When she faced him again, the confidence in her eyes flickered with something darker. Fear, maybe, or warning. But she added, almost under her breath, they don't know about this place yet. That single phrase hung in the air, a threat and a promise wrapped into one. Then, just as the first stars began to twinkle, Tobias made his choice. His voice was steady but carried the weight of someone who had already crossed a line he couldn't uncross. One night, he said, firm and unyielding. You can stay in the guest room tonight, but come dawn, you'll need to find somewhere else. Violet's smile was different now. Softer, edged with something unspoken, like she hadn't expected even that small mercy. He watched her strain against the weight of that battered trunk, and before he even realized it, his feet moved of their own accord, stepping forward to help. When his hands found hers on the cold brass handle, she looked up at him with a flicker of surprise, an unspoken question hanging in her eyes. I may not approve of your line of work, he said softly, voice low enough to hide the tremor of conviction. But I was raised to treat ladies with respect. She chuckled, the sound light and free, yet there was no bitterness behind it this time. Lady, she echoed, a crooked smile breaking through. It's been a long while since anyone called me that. She let him lift the trunk, and he couldn't help but notice how surprisingly light it was. Almost as if her burdens, like her possessions, had been pared down to essentials, making her easier to vanish into the shadows. Most of her belongings had been left behind, a deliberate choice to slip through the cracks of society unseen. Inside the modest house, Tobias flicked open the oil lamps, casting a warm glow over a room that Martha once envisioned as a nursery. The irony wasn't lost on him, bringing a woman of questionable virtue into the very space where he'd once dreamed of raising children. It's not much, he murmured, placing her trunk at the foot of a narrow, worn bed. But it's clean, and it's private. Violet traced her fingers along the patchwork quilt, her touch delicate, as if she feared the fragile fabric might dissolve beneath her fingertips. It's perfect, she whispered, and Tobias caught a flicker of something unexpected in her voice. Gratitude. Genuine gratitude. Not the practiced charm she'd worn like armor since stepping down from that battered wagon. He hesitated, then turned toward the door, but something made him stop. Violet, he said, voice edged with concern. Those men you mentioned, how long before they realize you've gone? Silence stretched between them, long enough that Tobias wondered if she'd vanish into the shadows without a word. When she finally responded, her voice was barely more than a whisper. trembling with the weight of secrets. They've got someone watching Sarah Beth. Someone who's been tracking every letter, every contact she's made, every move. Her eyes held too much knowing, too much darkness. They know about this place, Tobias. They've always known. A cold dread seeped into his bones, turning his blood to ice. "What are you telling me?" he demanded, voice tight with rising fear. "Sarah Beth didn't send you here just to save yourself," she said softly, almost painfully. "She sent me here to save you." Her hands shook now, trembling as her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. "The men hunting me, they're not just after me. They want to make an example out of everyone who's helped me, anyone who's shown me kindness." His stomach clenched, the weight of her words sinking in. "How long?" His tone was flat, deadly calm, an edge that cut through the quiet. 3 days behind me when I left Kansas City," she whispered, voice trembling. "Maybe less now." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold together the shattered pieces of her resolve. Outside, the night seemed to hold its breath. But Tobias knew better. Something moved just beyond the edge of his fence. Maybe a coyote, maybe just the wind teasing the tall grass. Yet, after years spent alone on this rugged frontier, he could tell when the darkness whispered secrets different from the usual night sounds. His pulse quickened as he whispered into the shadows. "They're already here, aren't they?" He eased to the window, peering through the crack in the curtains. The moon cast a ghostly glow over his land, painting the barn in shimmering silver and deepening shadows. Nothing visible, just empty pasture stretching into the dark. But that emptiness felt wrong, like the very air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unseen. "False alarm," he muttered, though his grip tightened on the rifle resting by the door. "Probably just my nerves playing tricks," he told himself, trying to steady his racing mind. Violet stepped up beside him, her presence warm and steady against the chill of the night. Her closeness made him acutely aware of her skin's gentle heat. "Your imagination didn't survive 3 years alone on this land by being careless," she whispered softly, voice low but firm. "If your instincts say something's wrong, then it's probably true." She was right. And deep down, both of them knew it. The silence outside was unnatural. Too perfect, too still. Even his horses, usually alert and twitching at every rustle, seemed unnervingly quiet. His livestock, usually quick to sense danger, had fallen eerily silent. He needed answers. "Tell me about Sarah Beth," he said, voice strained. "How did she know about Martha and the baby?" "I never mentioned them in my letters." Violet leaned against the window frame, her reflection flickering ghost-like in the glass. Then she hesitated before speaking, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of secrets long buried. "Sarah Beth Collins isn't who you think she is," she said after a long pause. "Her real name is Sarah Beth Morrison." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Judge Morrison, an infamous figure in the territories, tangled up in scandals that stained newspapers from Missouri to Oregon. He was a man with powerful enemies, a man whose name was whispered in hushed tones for corruption, land fraud, and political manipulation. Tobias felt the cold grip of realization tighten around him. Morrison's shadow stretched across the frontier, wielding influence like a concealed dagger. Her husband was a territorial judge, Violet continued, voice steady but heavy with emotion. He was connected to some very dangerous people, Racketeers, land speculators, men who'd killed to keep their secrets buried. She found out what he was really involved in. Human trafficking, land theft, political corruption that reached all the way to Washington. Her eyes flickered with pain. When she tried to leave him, he had her declared mentally incompetent, locked away like a pawn in his game. How did she escape? She didn't. I broke her out. Violet's words carried a fierce pride, a defiance born of hardship. Morrison owned the brothel where I worked, used it for blackmail, for gathering dirt on politicians and businessmen. She spun around to face him fully, and in her eyes, he saw a flicker of something darker, regret maybe, or a heavy weight of guilt. I never knew she'd been writing to you, she admitted softly, voice trembling like a breeze through dry leaves. I didn't realize I'd sent you to someone innocent, but you came anyway. I was desperate. Her fingers reached out, trembling slightly, and brushed against his arm, warm and trembling against his roughened skin. Now I've dragged you into something dangerous, something that could get you killed. Her voice broke on that last word, heavy with dread. Outside, a soft, almost mournful whinny escaped one of Tobias's horses, carrying a note of unease that made both of them freeze in place. Tobias, who'd cared for those animals since they were foals, recognized the sound immediately. Not the alert of a horse sensing a predator or shivering at a sudden gust. No, this was different. It was the sound of a horse recognizing a human stranger, a subtle but deadly warning. His eyes narrowed as he asked, "How many men are we facing?" Without waiting for an answer, he moved with practiced urgency toward his gun cabinet. Morrison kept a private militia, at least 6 men. Ex-military, ex-law enforcement. The kind who didn't ask questions once they drew their guns. Violet's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her nerves, trembling like a leaf. They're professional killers, Tobias. This isn't some frontier duel where everyone's got a fair shot. These men don't play by any rules. Tobias grabbed his shotgun, fingers working the shells with a precision born of years of survival, loading them with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Maybe he believed he could face them head on. But deep down, he knew. This land was his home, and he knew every hidden trail, every hollow and thicket better than they ever could. "Maybe not," he said, voice low and steady. "But I know this land. I know every inch of it, and I'll fight to protect it." Violet's voice came urgent, almost pleading. "You don't understand. They don't just kill, they destroy. Your reputation, your livelihood, everyone you love. Morrison's got judges and sheriffs in his pocket across 5 territories. He's got power that reaches into every corner of this land." The words hung heavy between them, but then a new sound sliced through the tense silence. Careful, deliberate footsteps, slow and quiet, like someone trying to slip past unseen. Both of them stiffened, instinct kicking in. Tobias signaled for Violet to stay low as he crept toward the front door, every nerve on edge. The footsteps paused, and that pause, longer than expected, felt more threatening than if they'd kept going. Whoever was out there knew how to hunt a man. 3 years ago, Violet whispered, voice barely audible over the faint creak of the old wood. "You filed that claim against the Territorial Railroad Commission. Do you remember?" Tobias froze, hand on the door latch, heart pounding harder. Of course he remembered. The railroad had tried to seize his land without so much as a "by your leave," claiming eminent domain. He'd fought them in court, and against all odds, he'd won. But victory had come at a steep price. His savings drained, enemies in high places made. The moment hit him like a thunderclap, blinding, brutal, and impossible to ignore. She thought, if I was here, if it looked like you were hiding a known outlaw, the law could justify whatever they planned to do to you. Violet's voice trembled with a guilt that clenched his chest tighter than a noose. She was trying to give him a fighting chance, warning him that danger was closing in. Silent, deadly, and relentless. Without warning, a window shattered in the back of the house. Shards of glass raining down like deadly rain, immediately followed by the thunderous stomp of boots pounding across the kitchen floor. These weren't men hunting prisoners or asking polite questions. They'd come to finish what the law had failed to do. Tobias grabbed Violet's hand, pulling her toward the back door. But the frantic sounds from that direction told him their escape route was already sealed. They were completely surrounded, trapped within the walls he'd built with his own sweat and blood, the home where he'd dreamed of raising a family. His mind raced. The root cellar. He whispered urgently, guiding her toward a concealed trap door nestled near the fireplace. It led to an abandoned mine shaft, a dark, twisting tunnel that might just buy them a few precious moments. "We can get out through the barn," he whispered fiercely, desperation thick in his voice. Then a cold voice cut through the chaos outside, calm but commanding. "This is Deputy Marshal Crawford. We have a federal warrant for Violet McCall and anyone hiding a known fugitive." A federal marshal, an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. That meant Morrison's reach extended far beyond any outlaw gang Violet had faced. A territorial judge with connections to federal law, the kind of man who could turn a simple hunt into a nightmare. "We know you're inside," the voice continued, unwavering. "Surrender now, and we'll make this easy for everyone involved." Violet's grip on his hand tightened, trembling beneath her skin. He felt it. Her fear, her resolve. "They're not here for a simple arrest," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "Crawford works directly for Morrison. I've seen him before." Heavy footsteps echoed through his kitchen, methodical, searching, relentless. More glass shattered, this time from the bedroom window, signaling they were conducting a room-by-room sweep. Minutes, maybe less, before they'd be discovered. Tobias lifted the trapdoor as quietly as a man could, revealing the narrow wooden ladders spiraling downward into pitch-black darkness. The root cellar had been dug by the last owner, a paranoid soul who'd feared Indian attacks that never arrived. Now, it might be their only shield against death. Now it might be the only thing standing between us and the grave, he muttered. "Ladies first," he whispered, voice barely audible. But Violet shook her head, fierce and unyielding. "If something happens to you, I'm already dead." "You go first," she said, her green eyes shining with defiance in the flickering lamplight. "Besides, cowboy, I've been running from killers longer than you've been alive." Before he could protest, she leaned in, pressing her lips to his, soft, quick, desperate like a prayer for survival. The dank, musty scent of earth and old potatoes clung to the root cellar, but the air was still breathable. Just enough to breathe deep as the tunnel stretched out before him, exactly as he remembered. Overhead, Violet moved silently, her fingers closing the trap door behind her just as the thunder of boots rattled across his creaking floorboards. "Where's that tunnel?" she whispered, her voice strained with a flicker of panic barely held in check. He took her hand, guiding her through the darkness, feeling along the jagged, weathered stone walls with his free hand. The passage was tight, so narrow it forced them into a single line. And every step forward was a gamble toward what he desperately hoped was still an open way out. Behind them, muffled voices echoed through the house, the sharp crack of commands. "Check every room. Tear this place apart if you have to." A gruff reply came, steady and cold. "Crawford wants them alive." Violet's footsteps faltered, her breath catching as she pressed against the rough tunnel wall. "Why alive?" she whispered, voice trembling. Morrison's never cared about keeping witnesses breathing before. That question haunted Tobias, but he pushed it aside. Men like Judge Morrison didn't keep folks alive out of mercy. They did it because they needed something. And whatever Morrison sought from them was likely worse than a quick death. The tunnel inclined upward, hinting they were nearing the foundation of the barn. Tobias caught the faint, familiar smell of hay and horse leather, comforting scents that now felt like a trap waiting to spring. If Crawford's men were as sharp as Violet claimed, they'd have someone watching the obvious escape routes. But Violet's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "There's something else I didn't tell you about Sarah Beth's letter." Even now, with armed killers storming his house, she was holding back. "What is it?" he pressed. She took a shaky breath, her voice trembling. "She wrote about a safe, one you inherited from your wife's family, and some documents inside that could be worth more than gold to the wrong hands." Violet's breathing grew ragged from the climb and her mounting fear. "Morrison isn't just after you because of the railroad case. He wants what Martha's family left behind." Tobias froze mid-step, so suddenly that Violet bumped into him. The safe. Martha's family's safe. It had slipped his mind entirely, a heavy iron box tucked away in the barn loft, alongside other inherited relics. Martha's father had been a territorial surveyor, charting railroad routes and mineral deposits across 3 states before his death. Maps, detailed, secret maps, documenting ore veins and water rights that the government never officially recorded. They could be worth millions to the right buyer or used to sabotage railroad deals based on crooked claims. Her voice carried a new weight, a quiet realization. "This isn't just about a legal challenge or bias," she whispered, eyes wide with understanding. This was about something far bigger, something that could change everything. The moment you realize you've stumbled onto evidence that could shatter Morrison's entire empire. That's when the air thickens with danger. Suddenly, the barn door groaned open, its rusty hinges protesting as a pair of boots moved with calculated stealth across the creaking wooden floor. Hay stirred and whispered in the stale air as someone methodically checked every stall, their steps deliberate and quiet, inching closer to their only escape. Trapped between the men inside the house and whoever was now hunting their trail outside, Violet's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "We need those maps, now." Her eyes burned with urgency. "They're the only thing standing between us and death. As long as Morrison doesn't know where they are, he can't afford to kill us." Tobias's voice was low, but firm. "The loft. 20 feet above the stall where they're searching. That's where they hide the safe." Through the thin, weathered floorboards above their heads, they could hear a man moving with relentless purpose, searching each stall with the precision of a seasoned tracker. The search was closing in, step by step, inching closer to the tunnel exit. That's when Tobias saw the fatal flaw in their plan. The tunnel's exit was directly beneath the loft, where Martha's safe was concealed. To get to their last hope of leverage against Morrison, they'd have to surface right where Crawford's man was sweeping the barn. The boots above suddenly stopped. A tense silence stretched thin. Through the gaps in the planks, Tobias glimpsed the outline of a man with a rifle, methodically checking every corner of the barn, his focus absolute. They had maybe 30 seconds before he uncovered the tunnel entrance. Violet pressed something cold and metallic into Tobias's palm. A small, daring weapon, the kind a woman of her skill might hide in her corset for moments like this. 2 shots, she whispered fiercely in his ear. Make them count. Tobias hesitated, unsure if he could ask her to do that. But Violet's eyes flashed with determination. I'm not asking, she said. I'm offering. Her green gaze burned in the dim light, filtering down from above. Besides, cowboy, I've faced worse odds than this. The man above moved toward the ladder leading up to the loft, where Martha's safe was hidden. If he climbed, he'd gain the high ground, with a clear shot at anyone emerging from the tunnel. But if Tobias and Violet struck now, while he was distracted, they might catch him off guard. Tobias made his choice. Quiet as a shadow, he pushed open the tunnel's hidden exit and rolled out behind a pile of hay bales, daring the derringer in his hand. The searcher was just 20 feet away, his back turned as he examined the loft ladder. Tobias's voice was barely a whisper. Drop the rifle. The man spun around with practiced speed, a weapon ready to fire. But Violet was already behind him, moving faster than any man with a gun. She snatched a pitchfork from the wall, pressing the tines against the back of his neck before he could lift his weapon. Deputy Marshal Crawford, I presume, she said, her voice honeyed but deadly. He didn't wear fear like a badge, no trembling hands, no wild eyes, making him scarier than any man who'd lose his nerve in a heartbeat. Miss McCall, Judge Morrison will be pleased to see you again, he said with a calm that chilled the air. I'm sure he will. That is, until those survey maps are handed over to the real authorities, federal agents who don't take kindly to liars and thieves. Violet's voice was steady, laced with a quiet confidence Tobias could tell was more bluff than fact, but it still made Crawford's face twitch. Tell me, Crawford, does Morrison know you figured out what Martha's father documented in those maps? Something in Crawford's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his face. What maps? His voice was too quick, too eager, betraying a glimmer of genuine curiosity that didn't quite fit. He didn't know about the safe. Morrison had sent him with orders to kill Tobias and capture Violet. But he hadn't spilled the secrets hidden in that barn loft, the real treasure. The survey maps that prove Morrison's been falsifying geological reports for the railroads. Tobias said softly, playing along. For the past 5 years. The ones showing he's been selling mineral rights to land owned by the federal government. Crawford's face drained of color. An accusation like that could topple Morrison's entire empire, drag down every crooked official who turned a blind eye. Men like Crawford, who'd taken Morrison's bribe money, would face federal prison, or worse. Those maps don't exist, Crawford muttered, but his voice was hollow, uncertain. Then why are you here? Violet pressed, her pitchfork digging deeper into his neck. Why did Morrison send 6 armed men to kill a rancher and grab a prostitute? What's so damned valuable about this piece of land that it's worth murder? Just then, the pounding of horses' hooves echoed across the ranch. Faster, closer. Through the barn window, Tobias saw flickering torches in the distance. At least 4 riders charging straight toward them. Back up? He shot Crawford a question, a flicker of hope. Crawford's grin was cold, calculating, dangerous, insurance. Morrison doesn't like loose ends, especially ones that might know too much. and he sure as hell doesn't want witnesses or witnesses' friends to survive. Violet caught Tobias's gaze across the dim barn, and in her eyes, he saw the same terrible understanding, the same realization that Morrison hadn't just sent killers to silence them. No, he'd sent men to erase everyone involved, even his own men, if they knew too much. Those riders aren't here to help. They're here to wipe the slate clean. Tobias's voice hardened. They're here to finish Morrison's dirty work, all of it. For the first time, Crawford looked genuinely afraid. Fear that seeped into his bones and made him tremble. That fear became their greatest advantage. Faced with a choice, certain death at the hands of Morrison's cleanup crew or a slim chance at escape, Crawford made his move. "There's a back trail through the canyon," he blurted out, voice trembling, all traces of his earlier bravado gone. His gamble now was to bargain with the devil he'd once trusted. In the haunting shadows of a moonless night, Tobias stared at his tethered horse behind the old farmhouse, knowing that if they moved now, they might slip away before Morrison's killers even realized they'd been targeted. Every second counted. "We've got to get those maps," Violet whispered, her voice sharp as a knife, pressing the pitchfork against Tobias's throat to keep him in line. Climbing into the loft with Crawford's rifle in hand, Tobias kept a wary eye on their prisoner, heart pounding. Down below, he spotted the safe, just as he remembered, hidden beneath a tattered stack of horse blankets and discarded farm tools, long forgotten in the shadows of the barn. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the rusty combination Martha had drilled into him years ago, fearing the lock might have seized up with age. When it finally clicked, inside lay the secrets that could topple a corrupt empire, rolled up survey maps, detailed in Martha's careful handwriting. They laid bare mineral deposits, water rights, and land boundaries that clashed with every official map from the past decade. Morrison's men had paid hefty bribes to control land worth nothing, or worse, federal property. "Got 'em," Tobias called softly, tucking the documents inside his shirt as the distant thundering of hooves grew louder. Through the barn window, he saw 4 riders emerging, faces shadowed beneath low-brimmed hats, their torches flickering menacingly. These weren't lawmen or hired guns. They were executioners sent to wipe out anyone who dared to challenge Morrison's grip. Crawford had warned them. Morrison was eliminating everyone connected to this operation, no matter the cost. "Move," Violet barked, and the trio sprinted toward Crawford's sturdy bay mare, built for the wildest trails and longest nights. Crawford vaulted onto the horse first, helping Violet up behind him, while Tobias swung onto his own steed from the corral. They rode with reckless urgency, tearing through the night toward the canyon trail that twisted like a serpent through the darkened hills. An escape route only a man with local knowledge could navigate in the blackness. Behind them, the glow of fire blossomed against the night sky as Morrison's men set the ranch ablaze, destroying everything that might connect them to the truth. The house where Martha had fallen, the barn where he'd planned to store hay for cattle he'd never own, burned to ash in a fiery inferno. Yet Crawford's familiarity with the land proved invaluable. The narrow, treacherous canyon trail was a death trap for anyone unfamiliar, full of hidden switchbacks and sharp drops. In the darkness, only a seasoned guide could steer clear of disaster. By dawn, they had pushed 30 miles into the wilderness, climbing toward the territorial capital's distant lights. 3 days later, they found themselves in the office of Federal Marshal William Hayes, staring as he spread the survey documents before him, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. Hayes was one of the few officials Morrison hadn't bought or cowed into silence. And the evidence on that desk was the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the West. Imagine a man who's just sealed his fate with a nod, knowing full well that his cooperation has set off a chain reaction strong enough to topple half of a territorial government. Crawford's silence was his only shield as he granted immunity, eyes dark with resolve. Behind him, Morrison's web stretched across 7 territories, tangled with the influence of at least 20 federal appointees, an empire built on greed and corruption. This revelation was like a thunderclap in a quiet frontier town, a storm that would wipe out the rotten roots of the old regime. But inside Tobias Crow's mind, the noise was drowned out, swallowed by a different scene. He barely registered Morrison's network unraveling. His focus was fixed on Violet, standing silent at the marshal's window, gazing out over the bustling, sun-baked streets of the capital. She'd been quiet since leaving the ranch, her face a mask of quiet reflection, as if she was finally coming to terms with the end of her years of running. Tobias stepped outside with her, the weight of the moment pressing down. "What happens now?" he asked softly, breaking the silence. When she turned to face him, her green eyes held a strange, new calm, peace, where there once was only pain. "I'll testify against Morrison," she said, her voice steady, "and I'll help make sure he can't hurt anyone else again." She moved closer, close enough that Tobias caught the faint scent of soap from the boarding house, a stark contrast to the expensive perfume she wore that first night in town. Then she added, "And if you'll have me, I want to help you rebuild that ranch." He looked away, the memories of fire and ash still fresh. "Morrison's men burned it to the ground," he muttered. But Violet's smile was gentle, unwavering. "You still have the land. The government will compensate you, cover your losses, plus damages for everything Morrison put you through." Her words carried a quiet strength. "And I've got some savings, enough to buy cattle, lumber, whatever else we need to start fresh." 6 months later, Tobias stood on the porch of a new home, the warm western sun casting long shadows across the land. Violet was in the backyard, tending a vegetable garden she'd planted behind the rebuilt barn. Her once crimson dresses had been replaced by sturdy work clothes, her painted lips by the natural flush of honest labor. She'd kept her promise to help rebuild. More than that, she'd helped him find a new purpose. The lonely widower who'd once ordered a mail-order bride was gone, replaced by a man who'd learned that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil. Justice had its own slow, relentless pace. 18 months into his prison sentence, Judge Morrison met his end. Strangled by inmates who'd uncovered his history of exploiting women and children. Crawford, meanwhile, had started anew as a legitimate lawman in California. And the survey maps that once threatened to cost them everything now laid the groundwork for new laws protecting territorial land rights, an ironclad shield against future corruption. In the quiet evenings, Tobias would sometimes find Violet reading the newspaper accounts of Morrison's trial, making sure justice was truly being served. But more often, she looked forward, dreaming of improvements, planning for the children they hoped to raise on that very land.